Welcome, everyone. My name is Caroline Lair, and I'm the founder of The Good AI, a community of AI talent and startups on a mission to build AI solutions for a more sustainable future.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Gabriel, and I recently joined Caroline. I'm leading community and program activities, and thank you so much for joining us for today's The Good AI conversation.
So today we are hosting another discussion around the topic of sustainability in the supply chain. And this is a crucial concern. We'll share here two key metrics to have in mind. Supply chains are responsible for more than 80% of greenhouse gas emission and more than 90% of the impact on air, land, water, biodiversity, and geological resources. The second metrics is from the international labor organizations that estimate that nearly 40 million people are in a situation of modern slavery within supply chains. So together with our expert today, we'll explore how AI technologies can be applied to optimize this supply chain with a focus on transportation or packaging in order to reduce the environmental impact and also improve the working conditions. And we'll try to focus on the food and fashion industries today.
We kick off today's conversation with a brief introduction of our experts, and we are very fortunate to have them on board and for them taking the time of being with us today. And then we're going to deep dive into the conversation on how AI can enable a more sustainable supply chain. Of course, we welcome your questions throughout the conversation. I'm going to share with you in a minute how you can submit your questions, and we're going to attend to your questions at the end. But before you get to meet our experts, we actually want to hear from you because it's called the Good AI conversation and not the Good AI lecture. And we, of course, want to include you as well. And for this, we're using a platform called Mentimeter, which you might already be familiar with. If not, no worries. It's very simple. You don't have to register. You don't have to download anything. I'm going to share my screen with you. And in a second, you're going to see a QR code. And all you have to do is scan the QR code with your phone, or if you don't have your phone at hand, you can always open a new tab in the browser, go to menti.com, and enter the code you see on the left-hand side. The code is 30613266, and I'm going to do the same. So all you have to do is scan your QR code and then join us. And it would be fantastic if all of you can join us because, as I said, this is a conversation and we want to hear from you. In case you have any difficulties, just let us know in the chat. All right, so what is our first question? The first question we want to know from you is, when you hear a sustainable supply chain, what do you actually associate with it? What is the first thing that comes to your mind? And you can type your answer now on Mentimeter. And as a disclaimer, of course, everything is anonymous, so don't worry about suggesting anything that might not be 100% accurate. We just want to hear, what do you associate with it? Okay, we already have one that is resilient to unplanned disruptions, sustainable sourcing, transportation costs. All partners along the supply chain have consistent standards, a common understanding of sustainable practices, less carbon emissions over the full supply chain, collaborative, reduce the carbon footprint emission. We actually have an expert on our call today talking about carbon accounting, of course, considering the environmental impact. Fantastic. Great. I think that's already a good start, Caroline. And I would say, without further ado, should we introduce our speakers?
Sure. So right now, it's a pleasure to welcome all of our speakers. We have today two startups, two tech providers, the largest food manufacturer in the world, so we're very lucky, one consultant group, and one researcher. So we're going to have different perspective, which is really interesting to address this topic. So let me have everyone joining. Okay, we have Christophe, we have Anam, we have Sven and Mauro. And our last speaker, Adriana, is actually based in Australia, so it's now 3 a.m. for her. So we'll go through a recording from her after the presentation of each of you. So yes, you have basically 3 minutes. It's a very difficult exercise, we know, but we're going to have plenty of time during the conversation to learn more about what you do. So please introduce yourself, your position in your company, and also we're always interesting to understand very briefly for now how you envision sustainability in your work or in your solutions. So we're going to start with Christophe Villain. You are the Global Head of Supply Chain and Procurement Technology at Nestlé.
Indeed, it's a pleasure to meet you today. Yes, Nestlé, I think, is known by many of us. It's present in 187 countries. We have around 2,000 brands, some very iconic ones like Nespresso or Nescafe. And we are serving millions of pets and citizens around the world on a yearly basis. My role within this company is, as you said, heading the supply chain and procurement technologies for the Nestlé Group. And we have quite of an extended team with many partners around the world for that purpose. And I'm very pleased to be in this panel today.
Thank you, Christophe.
Fantastic. And I would like to ask Anam now, the founder and CEO of Kavita AI, to introduce himself. Anam, you're joining us from London today.
I am. Thank you, Karen. I just want to tell a quick story that will help explain what we do. So, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. But alternatively, feel free to.
No, it's not. It's not
sharing this.
For some reason. Okay, so we help procurement managers monitor and manage disruption risks to suppliers and purchase orders. Coming out of COVID-19, we saw the structural vulnerabilities in global supply chains, and everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But the heroes of COVID, for me, really have been procurement managers that are deep down in big companies, particularly manufacturers, that have to ensure raw materials arrive on time because their production schedule depends on it. Now, the problem is that they're sourcing from all over the world, from hundreds of suppliers, the complexity, the global risk exposure, and so much goes wrong. So from the moment that a buyer places an order with a supplier to the moment that they receive the goods, there's this massive black box and complete lack of transparency. And this is where all the disruptions happen, whether it's issues to do with that cause delays like documentation or communication issues or external risks like COVID, like natural disasters. We detect all of these issues and we enable that communication focused on the order between the buyer and the supplier. So you can track that order. So you can put some structure in that process and get some visibility over your communications and the external issues. So that's essentially what we do, is we help procurement managers monitor and manage disruptions to their orders.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anam. And we're going to deep dive into this a bit later on how exactly you do this.
Now we have Sven Loeffler, who is the tribe and chapter head at T-System International. Hi, Sven.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Hi, Karen. Good to have me here, and thanks. Yes, Sven Loeffler, data economy and data monetization is my topic over the last 5 years at Deutsche Telekom T-Systems, and I'm happy to share the latest news that we announced on our Mobile World Congress in Barcelona last 2 weeks ago, and I'm happy to present a solution that we developed together with the Google team. And maybe Caroline, you have the chance to open up this slide, then I would quick guide you through what we did, and I would like to show you a quick highlight what we introduced here. So maybe when we move over what we are doing there, we are, as Deutsche Telekom, as T-Systems, a business arm of Deutsche Telekom, we developed a platform, a solution, a data space where we are bringing all suppliers in a supply chain together, and we are orchestrating as a data space operator, the different data rooms. And this is what we developed. We are in a way neutral and independent. We are doing it for several industries, and we are bringing consumers, app providers, IT enablers, and the data experts that are dealing with the AI models together to implement supply chain solutions. And when you go further, this example shows you fantastic how the future will look like, right? You're searching on a web page, in a portal, you're interested in milk, organic milk, and when you go deeper, the next slide, please, then you will see that the carbon footprint of the different production steps will be visualized for you. That can happen in the fashion industry, that can happen, as I said here, in the example with the milk. And we are bringing with these data space concepts, decentralized concepts, where we are collecting data, we're not storing it centralized, all together and visualizing it in such a web page, but also in dashboards. And maybe we have a look into it. So I would like to introduce it, how it can look like.
From point A to point B. It includes rearing plus harvesting, the raw milk production, the packaging of the milk, transportation between the stages, and to the stores, as well as waste disposal and the recycling of material. During that supply chain from cow to shelf, lots of data is generated. This data, once made transparent and exchanged between the players, helps to improve production processes, reduce costs, and make production overall more sustainable. Customers and nature will be thankful for this new transparency. The data that has been collected during the whole milk production process comes together in a data space, our data intelligence hub. It is visualized in a dashboard and serves as a basis for further product innovation. Get your supply chains future ready. Find out more at dih.telecom.net/n.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Looking forward for the nice conversation.
Well, we had this slide that we can keep it for later if you don't want to comment it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's visualize perfectly the different process steps, but we will keep it for later for the conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Fantastic. And then last but not least, we have Mauro Cozzi, who is the co-founder and CEO of Amitwise. Today, he's joining us from Edinburgh.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm up here for a conference. We're usually based down in London, but really appreciate the opportunity to present here to the Good AI team and along such a great panel. My name is Mauro Cozzi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Amitwise. We're a business entirely focused on helping the world accelerate the transition to net zero. The vision of the world that we have is one where every business at every point of decision, when you're picking a new material, when you're designing a new product, when you're making an investment decision, you can use carbon as a KPI the same way that we use dollar signs as a KPI today. And the way that we are going to get there is today our focus is we have software that helps businesses measure, report, and ultimately make decisions on how to reduce their carbon footprint and do so profitably. And most interestingly for this conversation, our entire focus as a business is how can we help orchestrate the large-scale decarbonization that needs to happen within supply chains. So it's really fantastic to share the stage with somebody like Christoph. We love to partner with businesses like Nestle. I was doing a quick Google before this. Nestle has a target to reduce your carbon footprint by 50% by 2030, I believe. And I know that includes some parts of your supply chain, right? And ultimately, that means that those suppliers need to be tracking their carbon footprint as precisely as possible to tell you, hey, this is how much I've reduced my footprint, right? But as I'm sure most people in this call have been exposed to, that's a really complex thing to do. Most businesses haven't even measured their carbon footprint ever, or they're just getting started. They're doing it through spreadsheets. It's a broken process, very prone to errors. And ultimately, the outcomes of that is the world keeps being beaten by climate change, and we need to accelerate the action, right? So we build software and machine learning-based technologies with carbon accounting expertise behind the scenes that allows suppliers to the likes of a Nestle to really quickly get a carbon baseline, understand, hey, where am I today? and then share that data and put in place plans to get to net zero as quickly as possible, which is what we need for this world. So yes, it's really excited to share the stage with everybody today. Such a relevant conversation. So thank you, Caroline and Karen, for putting this together.
Thank you so much for being here. And also, I'm really looking forward to learning more about carbon accounting. And I love the fact that we already have synergies among you all, the panelists, through this short introduction. And we have one more speaker, Caroline, with us.
Indeed, we're going to listen now to Adriana Bora, who is a PhD candidate, a talent as well of the Good AI community. She won the Arkai AI Awards in 2021 for her work around the use of AI to fight against modern slavery in supply chains. So let's listen to her.
Hello, everybody. My name is Adriana. Thank you so much for having me today as part of this discussion and for giving me the opportunity to present to you Project AIMS, which stands for AI Against Modern Slavery. This project is responding to the challenge of modern slavery, a global crime that touches more than 40 million people across the globe, 1 in 4 being a child, with women and girls disproportionately affected. Out of those, 60 million are estimated to feed directly into the supply chain of big corporations and to end up in the goods and services that we are consuming every day. So both governments and companies have the responsibility to apply law, implement due diligence, but also create transparency on the measures that they are taking to eliminate and prevent modern slavery from supply chain. On one hand, for companies, this is not only an obligation, but also a great opportunity to become more sustainable at large, and also to strengthen their supply chain and respond better to further crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic. On the government side, on the other hand, we have some really great initiatives, such as the Modern Slavery Act in UK and Australia. Those are national legislations and the first of this kind, and they are requiring companies to publish one statement a year where they're describing the structure of their supply chain and explaining the steps they're taking to ensure that modern slavery is not part of their supply chain and operations. We have many other countries across the globe looking at passing modern slavery legislation or larger due diligence legislations. And all of those legislations are requiring an element of reporting. So we have thousands of reports now being published, and both academia and the civic society have tried to analyze them. Over the last 6 years that we've been having the Modern Slavery Act in the UK, a great initiative led by Walk Free and WikiRate is trying to take samples of this statement and really try to understand how different sectors respond in regards to modern slavery. So they've been looking at the hotel sector, the finance sector, and more recently, the garment sector, which touches upon many of the very big fashion brands. With the garment sector, by looking at this report, we see as key finding that only 33% of the statement meet the minimum requirements outlined by the law. 35% did not identify any modern slavery risk. What is interesting to see is from those that did, only 61% of the high luxury companies address modern slavery risk compared to 85% of non-luxury companies, which really showcases how being more publicly faced and exposed to scrutiny influences the way companies are reporting and responding to modern slavery. This type of analysis also showcases that only 24% of investors disclose that they're really looking what their investees are doing regarding to modern slavery risk. And 43% of the statements did not disclose if they are providing.
I believe the video just froze. Let me check on Caroline. I guess she'll come back in a second, but I think it's very interesting because when we were looking at... You're back, fantastic.
Yes, so let's launch again.
For instance, special support for the supply chain workers that are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of those are really great findings that we are able now to gather by looking at these statements. Yet this report, for instance, only was able to look at 97 statements. But imagine if we were able to look at all the statements that have been published. We know that from the UK alone, we have an estimate of 17,000 statements being published each year, and we have thousands more from Australia and from the other countries across the globe. Yet these really in-depth analyses are really time-consuming, now taking up to 1 hour to manually assess and validate one statement. So the large and increasing volume of statements really also presents us with a new challenge. How can they all be evaluated? And why do we need to evaluate them? Well, we have to evaluate it to really understand the level of compliance, understand the impact of modern slavery legislation, and drive effective intervention and eradicate modern slavery for supply chain. Documenting the impact of new legislative acts is really an indispensable tool if we want to improve this legislation and also improve the business practices. So we need a solution that allows us to create accountability at scale. And this is where project teams entered the scenes. In April 2020, the project teams were launched in the partnership between the Future Society and Workfree Foundation. And in this project, we're looking at the use of artificial intelligence, specific natural language processing in analyzing this statement. And we built the first exploration of machine learning solutions. Our objectives are to build an open source tool that decreases the time it takes to look at those modern slavery statements, but also provide policymakers and legislators with a greater understanding of how these methods then can be used in other non-financial reporting contexts. We also want to encourage people from diverse domains to bring their expertise in the fight against modern slavery and in AI for social good projects. We collected our learning in some of our publications, and this one particularly, we're advocating for the need to publish the statement in machine-readable formats. We're also very proud to say that modern slavery is now open source and available on GitHub, and that we are the winners of the UNESCO International Research Center AI Award of 2021. So please go and check it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Moving forward, this project is going to be developed in partnership between the Queensland University of Technology and Mila in Canada, and also with the support of the community on GitHub. So with this, I would like to conclude that we have truly a great opportunity now to use technology to assist in creating this transparency that we need at scale when it comes to businesses' actions against modern slavery. But technology alone is not a silver bullet, and technology should only be developed in partnership with experts that really understand the field of modern slavery. And finally, this technology should be always ethically designed, even in times of crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. And now we're going to move to our conversation. And to start, I'd like to talk about data collection. I read a study from MIT that basically is studying that 81% of companies do not have visibility in their supply chain, and 54% have no visibility at all. So I'm wondering, like, even before starting discussing about the potential impact of AI on sustainability for supply chain, in the first place, how do you guys collect data, basically, which is a key requirement to build and deploy AI? And one question from Adriana that Adriana gave me for Christophe was about the collection of data around, so her use case is around modern slavery, but I guess this is the same questions for all the other use cases. So how do you, Christophe, to start, do you guys collect data needed for modern slavery statement and for also other use cases? And Adriana was also asking if this would be possible on the end of Nestle to produce some also machine readable copy when it comes to your official reporting and statements, so it's easier for them to analyze based on what we just heard. So what is your opinion on that? And please let us know.
Yeah. So I'll start maybe with the first part of the question. I think that indeed it's modern slavery is part of an overall encompassing, let's say, journey that we have committed to, which is of course looking at the human aspects of what we are doing with our partners. And when I say partners, we are talking about suppliers, external partners to the company, but also the environmental ones, the let's say impact on society. So we have been publishing something that we have as a context of what we call the Nestlé supplier codes and what we call our responsible sourcing standards, that are the minimum criteria that we are taking as a let's say an entry step for any person or any supplier working with our organization. Now, part of this journey is really the complexity to manage, and it requires some focus. And I think Sven was mentioning, something around dairy or milk. So maybe here, just to highlight the milk context, for us, just within our farms, we are collecting around 200 data entry points that we are then aggregating with an external partner, which is then correlating this data with a potential CO2 impact. And then we are bringing that back into what we call our GPS, which is our performance systems around CO2, to then aggregate it across the company. But as you can see, this is only one factor. This is only one specific area. And we have obviously many areas. We are sourcing many products, but we have also many criteria to monitor. So it comes with a complexity of aggregating the data and the volumes of those data to be then framing our journey and our either regeneration journey or our water commitment journey, our packaging, plastic packaging journey, and our CO2 journey. So that's the overall story here. I wouldn't resume it, but it's an important point, the modern slavery situation. But I wouldn't reduce it to it. As a company, you have to have an all-encompassing view of your impact on society, and this is what we are working on, with very strong commitments, as highlighted before. Now, on the second question, which is about, let's say, provide a readable format for certain organizations, this is done for the accounting statements, but because there's also some international accounting standards that we can link to, and therefore provide a much easier way, let's say, to our peers and to the different partners worldwide, or any entity that would like to review it. Today, one of the constraints that we are having is the diversity of the requirements that we are facing. And if we were really to apply it to any single asking organization to ease the reporting piece on their side, you can imagine that this would represent a massive work that we are not able to provide at this stage, maybe in the future, maybe. But I'm also quite confident because what was shown in the video is that there are some technologies, in fact, that allow it without having a PDF readable format to really, grasp the information and translate it into a structured data. And I think that at the end of the day, the technology is there, being readable, non-readable, to be able to extract the essence of what is claimed by a company and being able to benchmark the different companies between themselves.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christoph. And I would like to pass on the question actually to you, Mauro, with regards to data collection. You mentioned in the introduction you're focused on carbon accounting. Can you provide us an insight on how your practices are set up when it comes to data collection? You mentioned, for example, spreadsheets as well. So I'm curious, what are your practices and how does it exactly work?
Yeah, I mean, I think the beauty and the complicated thing about carbon footprints is that they are the entire story of a business, right? From the energy that is consumed to the raw materials that are consumed to the waste that is produced through production processes to even, it depends on what you consider to be within your boundaries of your organization, but sometimes it's even the emissions associated with the use of the products that you sell, right? So if you sell a car, is the burning of the fuel associated with the use of that car part of your footprint or not? And the data that sits behind that full picture is, I can only describe it as a crazy big mess, right? From yes, in some cases you get good data, and some organizations are able to have, say, great energy tracking through smart meters that are giving you near real-time energy consumption, and great, well-structured ERP systems that can tell you what they bought, who they bought it, and provide that structure in that data in a structured and machine readable way. But very, very often you find that at least in some parts of an organization, you will have data gaps, poor quality data. An example of this is having PDFs of utility bills instead of meter readings that are nicely structured, right? And I always talk about fixing the data gathering problem in carbon accounting as both a technology problem. We use things like machine learning to read PDFs and try to pull data from them. But it's very much also a service design. It's a human problem as well. You have to make it as easy as possible for people to provide the data that they have, to tell you what that data is, and then to be able to use technology and people to quality control to review that data. So I think in the context of carbon accounting in particular, the data challenge is so vast that there is no silver bullet. It really comes down to sort of putting together a puzzle of different tools and solutions. And I think it's great that Christoph talks about standards, because our industry suffers from both a combination of not strong enough standards and way too many standards and acronyms. And I talk to heads of sustainability all of the time who tell me, here's yet another acronym that I need to report into, right? And every customer that they sell to, particularly suppliers that we work with, demand different types of data. And so a conversation we are having a lot with industry leaders is how can we create a consistent standard across the board? But also, how can we make it such that however you're capturing your carbon footprint data, you can slice and dice that so that you can report into any standard, right? Being standard agnostic is something that we talk about a lot. So I don't know, Karen, if I've answered your question. I think, unfortunately, there's no silver bullet, there's no easy answer. But that's sort of a little bit of our perspective.
No, absolutely. And I just see in the comments from our participants, also Chelsea mentioned that, the lack of standards when it comes to reporting is definitely a challenge, because otherwise you basically compare apples to oranges, and it's difficult as well from a methodology perspective. So thanks for giving us an insight on that.
Maybe Sven, you want to comment here? So we saw through the video that you're also collecting and centralizing data, the different stage of the milk supply chain into this data space, powered by Google Cloud tools. So can you maybe also enlighten us on your way to collect data?
Yes, of course, and I can't agree more. The data collection and standardization of data is one of the challenges over the last years, right? And specifically when we are collecting data from different process steps, maybe you can bring up this slide, maybe Caroline, where you will see these data comes from different companies, right? In the harvesting process, in the storing, in the testing, processing, packaging, and even then to the delivery that it comes to into the shop, right? And this is a good example that each of these providers of data have different standards and models and legacy systems implemented, and this is actually the big challenge. So the big challenge is really to harmonize it. We are talking really often about digital twins or twins in the industry for the specific purpose to exchange these data. And our approach is to work really with associations. So because we have to overcome this challenge to exchange the data across companies, and as an association, as an example, VDMA, Association for Machine Tool Manufacturers with the OPCUA standards, or another one, VDA, Association for the automotive industry, they are defining the standards, how a customer is reflected and how a process step in the production is categorized. So that is one example. This is one thing how we would like to overcome this. So work intensively with associations and activities in the Gaia X, or if even in infrastructure initiatives like the Gaia X Foundation, Gaia X initiative, where we are defining reference standards. So that is one crucial part, and the data collection, of course, with infrastructure and tools that we are using as an example from the Google platform. Of course, you have all technologies available, but to really bring these data together with these defined standards is mainly 80% of all these projects what we are seeing. So that means we need AI to have an automated matchmaking exercise, so that when we are collecting the data from different perspectives, then we are bringing these ideally 80% automatically together and sorting it in the twin and then adjusting it manually. So really then calculating the carbon footprint emission for each of these steps to visualize at the end in one common dashboard on one common website, as we saw it, because the data consumer is not really interested in all the different process steps that we are here, or what I just discussed beforehand. But anyhow, a collection of data and its standards is really important. Otherwise, we are not jumping into the AI journey and not bringing these things together. And from the AI perspective, for preparation, for collecting, for matchmaking activities, we use fantastic tools and technologies from such vendors. And yeah, that's a starting point to overcome it, right?
Thank you, Sven. Karin, we may move to the second part.
Yes, absolutely. So now we would like to actually talk about more concrete case studies and really understand how are AI-enabled solutions currently deployed along the supply chain and various parts to enable a more sustainable supply chain. And I think we have the first question for Christoph. Caroline, if you want to take that.
Yeah, Christoph, we did discuss together a few use cases around supply chain optimization, but also focus on transportation and packaging at Nestlé. So we're super happy to understand a bit where you are. How do you deploy AI solutions here? Are they developed in-house, or are you working with any external tech providers? And then we'll discuss with Emitwise and Kavida about the solutions.
Thank you. I'll speak about some of the things that we are having and as well the opportunities that are in front of us, because this is a journey. This is not just something that we can claim to have mastered from day one. The reality today is, and I'm going to answer to your last question, which is, do we do it on our own or do we use external partners? We have very talented people internally, and there are very talented people externally. So we are joining forces to make it happen for the company. What we try to make sure is that due to our size, there's a very clear focus on what we are doing. And we define value with the core different elements, which are the standard ones that any company would have. But we have now integrated this sustainability journey as part of the decision-making criteria for our projects. So as part of this journey, we have been working on several projects. And I'll start maybe with the basics, because sometimes when we think AI, we think directly about auto machine learning, whatever, deep learning. But automation and, bringing further automation as part of this overall piece is bringing an impact onto our journey. I give you an example. 85% of our orders are paperless. That has an impact. We've been developing some machine learning around anticipating our contract volumes. Why is it so important from a sustainability perspective? But just because each time you're spot buying, you're impacting your CO2 targets. Those are the kind of things that we are trying to adapt along the way. Now, a bit more into the depth of our journey, the transportation management piece is, of course, an important piece. And here we've been unlocking insight visibilities about our overall networks. Okay, and then this is where those technologies are starting to make a sense and a difference, is how do we then optimize our overall supply networks? And we are talking outbound networks, but also inbound networks, which are at stake as well. It has to be, due to the volume of data, due to the sheer nature of what we are experiencing. The context is very volatile. Sanctions are appearing in some countries. Supply availability is appearing in some other countries. This has a direct impact. And how do we make sense out of it? Is very cumbersome if we have to bring the human factor in, and if we cannot augment it with AI capabilities. So this is where we can truly have an impact. Now, going forward, I think that there's many questions we have to ask ourselves. Inventory measures nowadays, or inventory optimization mechanisms are basically focusing on working capital, and ensuring supply capabilities. How many companies in this world have integrated the concept of sustainability in inventory management? Not many. Okay. E-sourcing. So if I'm just thinking about some capabilities around sourcing, for example. How do we integrate the sustainability component when we have a partner which has, let's say, a higher cost, but a better sustainability component, a lower cost? Those are decisions to be made that have to be taking in account many factors, and that goes beyond just the CO2. That goes with, as I was mentioning before and was mentioning, is how does it impact child labor? How does it impact, society, So those are the kind of things that we are trying to embed as part of each step within our supply chain. And what makes a difference, and I think Sven was talking about digital twin earlier on, what makes a difference is that now, due to the new, let's say, capabilities available across the value chain, okay, we're able to integrate more and more the different silos that, were present in the past. And we will be integrating further. We cannot claim we are there already. There's much more that can be done. But this type of transparency will allow us to find the new opportunities to basically achieve the journey and our commitments on sustainability.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christoph, for sharing those details. And you mentioned digital twin. I think that's a good segue into your field, Anam. You at Kavida are analyzing different factors that could create a disruption along the supply chain. You also mentioned procurement managers being one of the heroes for you. Can you give us a concrete example on how exactly you work, and how does what you offer tie back to a sustainability goal of an organization?
Yeah. So the summary is, I guess, all of our procurement processes and systems that we built now were built under the assumption of stability, which was the paradigm before this current paradigm of, VUCA. We live in a VUCA world: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So those current processes and workflows, they don't work in this new environment. That's why digitalization is absolutely essential to stay competitive. And data standardization was a really interesting question, because I think we were all talking about different data. And Mauro, really interesting from your side as well. As a startup, that data standardization issue, we had a similar issue, but if we don't solve it, we don't scale our businesses. We just become consultancy companies. For us, the data that we needed from the customer side, fortunately, sat nicely in the ERP systems, and we can connect with APIs, and that made everything easier. But the outputs that we produce for all of your orders for the procurement managers is which order is at risk of being delayed, why it's at risk of being delayed, and how long will that delay be. So data standardization is a huge issue, and I guess if we take, like, on a daily basis, the disruptions going on in the world, it could be, we monitor about 30 different types of exogenous shocks. COVID cases coming out of China right now. Could be anything like a port disruption, weather issues. So because the volatility is there right now, for most of these risks, there's no way you can predict them. So you have to monitor and minimize your response time. And that's what we enable, to give that visibility over what external risks could impact your orders, so you can monitor that. Talking about the issue of technology and where the technology is now to address some of these bigger issues, visibility is an interesting one. So we're seeing companies provide new multi-tier supplier relationship mapping. Now, it's not mapping out your entire supply chain, it's mapping out the relationships in your supply chain by analyzing all this web data and then finding those connections. It's a start. It's not visibility to your second tier and your third tier based on, the locations of their supply chain. So, but that's where the tech is right now, to be able to map those relationships with very little customer inputs. So that's a good side. Second thing, Christoph, you touched on something that I think is the biggest blocker to progress on this topic, and that is complexity. And it's the complexity that is paralyzing decision-making. So Christoph talked about the complexity of the data. Let's look at the complexity of the decisions. I think something like 11x emissions are produced from the supply chain versus your operational emissions, something like that. So someone in those positions that has to make those decisions is faced with these unbelievably complicated trade-offs between resiliency, between efficiency and cost, between sustainability, and there is no method to the madness right now on how do I optimize the trade-offs. Companies need to be able to say, okay, I'm going to compete in my market based on sustainability 30%, resiliency 30%, cost say 30%, and whatever it is. So they set what's most important to them, and then they need it's multi-criteria optimization modeling to understand, okay, if I take this decision, these are the trade-offs. If I source from this supplier, these are the trade-offs. And that's a really complicated task, because it's not just the strategic sourcing decisions, it's your daily operational decisions. How much inventory do I carry along the supply chain? Christoph talked about inventory. Yeah, that's a really good example. So all of these things have these very complicated trade-offs. And right now, there's no visibility over what these trade-offs are, about how do I optimize for these trade-offs for what's most important to me. But it's an area that I think it's the maths and the data is slowly aligning for us to be able to answer these questions and to give these capabilities to a lot of people. So I think that's a really exciting space, is that companies will be able to make these sustainability decisions that optimize for what's most important to them, as the optimization modeling and the data gets better and better, and we're able to configure a lot of this data. What else? No, that's what I would say.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks
Maybe
a lot.
if I may comment on that.
Yes,
piece,
please,
I
Christoph.
think that, a journey starts with one step and an ambition. And this is really what is required. It's focus from day one. You will not be able to address your full value chain on one go. So you have to define your biggest impacts, where technology can make a difference within your value chain, and where you can make a visible progress. So then you're creating this momentum, and of course, in due time, your overall maturity in this area on how you can help your sustainability journey through technology is going to be unwielding, basically. Yeah.
And of course, that approach is so powerful because it cascades down, right? Mm-hmm. Ultimately, when we see businesses like Nestle saying this is the most material part of our scope 3 of our supply chain, and you engage your suppliers, then we see those suppliers looking at their own full value chain and saying, where should we focus? And that cascades down, right? And I think I am a fundamental believer that that's how we actually save the world, is by just accelerating that process, right?
A question for both of you guys is, so we do a lot of work in apparel, and what we're seeing is apparel manufacturers being very proactive on things like sustainable materials. Honestly, that's not a complicated decision to take. But when it comes to redesigning the supply chains, changing their sourcing strategy, there's complete paralysis there about how do I do that and be competitive and sustainable at the same time. So we're seeing the movement on those less complicated decisions, but they're the bigger ones, the supply chain decisions. We're seeing a lot of paralysis at the moment, a lot of companies not knowing how to make those decisions.
Fantastic. I actually am curious because so we have two very interesting questions from the audience. But before that, Mauro, I wanted to ask you, because we were talking about the lack of international standards in the beginning, and these were also a few of the comments from our participants today joining us live. Who do you think should lead the way when it comes to defining those international standards? Do we have to rely on governments? Is it governments of specific countries, regions? Who do you think should lead that, especially in your field?
I think that it needs to be an independent body, and I think it needs to be informed by a collaboration between industry and large corporates in particular, because ultimately they are the ones who need to actually impact change, and regulators, because they are the ones who need to regulate it, right? And I think I'm curious if others have seen it, but obviously last week the SEC published their intentions to regulate carbon emissions reporting in the US, and it will continue to be a consultative sort of effort, right? So I think that's great. But I also think the flip side of standards, by the way, is there are some really strong fundamental frameworks on which to rely on. For example, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is, I always say, sort of the Bible of carbon accounting. And the good news is that independent bodies, for example, like the GRI, have been doing this for decades. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So I think we've actually gone a long way, despite, I know when we are in the industry, it's very easy to feel like things are slow. But yes, I think independent bodies with very close collaboration with businesses like Deutsche Telekom, like Nestle, and obviously innovators like Avida and Midwest as well, right? I think we can paint a picture of the possible. We can paint a picture of the art of the possible.
If I may just add briefly, Mauro, I think you're missing an important piece in the equation, the consumer.
Absolutely, for sure, yeah.
If the consumer is king in this decision-making process, we will evolve as well together with the consumers' evolutions.
I always say, ultimately, the biggest way we have impact is by showing the financial returns on the actions that we take. And I think consumers drive a lot of that, right? Consumers vote with their dollars. They want to see carbon footprint labels on every product. That's really hard to do, but they're pulling it out of us, right? So yeah, I agree, Christoph.
May I can add a point regarding these standards and who should regulate it or should it be regulated? My point of view is it could be stimulated by the laws and the government, but the real work to really define the standards should come from industry experts, so-called data stewards, or colleagues that are really modeling it and mapping data. And this is what I see in the past was started in different associations. And I would really force and motivate these kind of associations that are sitting in working groups together, as UPCOA, UMATI as an example. We are, as Deutsche Telekom, engaged in an universal machine access tool interface based on the UPCOA standards, where you have specifications and where you have detailed working group activities on a weekly, monthly basis, and they are defining then the standards. And that is a community driven, that's my point of view. It should be comes from the industry, from community, startups, bigger companies, bigger industry experts that are really pushing it then as a standard, ideally open source, and an open source framework where everybody can contribute, and there should be a regulated process with contributions and committers that then it comes the de facto standard, and this is how I see it, and that would be really helpful. I see it in a few areas, but not so intensively, but the trend is definitely there, and that is what I would like to see. So no government regulation, only initial motivation with funding money maybe, but then it should become quick open source and it should be regulated by the market instead of by the law and regulations.
Just a quick point.
Yes.
This is a really interesting topic, because again, I think we're all talking about different data. So from a startup's perspective, we have to work within the constraints of the current position right now. We can't rely on, a government passing a bill to make our lives easier. So we don't really have any other option than to take the data, the customer input data that is widely available amongst our market, and then put a process together and produce these outputs. So that question there, who should govern that process? I have never thought about that, because I guess our day-to-days have been, okay, what do we have? What solution can we engineer together based on what's out there at the moment that everyone has? So very interesting.
Yeah, here I think Sven raised a good point, and there are several industry initiatives like GS1 to which we're participating, and I think this is helping, bringing these common grounds to what we need for the industry overall, and the key leaders like us have to contribute and actively participate, which is something at least on our side we're doing.
One thing we are seeing as well, particularly in the apparel industries, we're seeing a lot of new legislation coming out about ESG, about supply chain mapping, whether it's the German Supply Chain Act or the New York Fashion Act for our core market. And that's going to only increase over time as governments want to protect consumers against things like greenwashing. Consumers want to see this level of transparency. We can guarantee that ESG legislation and visibility legislation is going to be increasing. But that's a slightly different topic to data standardization.
We may move to a few questions that we have from the audience. We have one question from Gonka about transportation. How do you see the role of autonomous vehicles in the sustainability of the supply chains? Are there any solutions started that target specific SC problems with AV?
Okay. can take a piece here. I think that we have seen some. We have already engaged in what we call AVGs for quite some time, especially within our manufacturing sites. They are bringing a certain level of safety that also is quite relevant for the people working on site. From an energy standpoint, it always depends where you are. I think that we can't take the word as a unified and uniform word, unfortunately. And this is something, if you're powering your let's say energy plant through diesel tanks or diesel machines to produce your electricity, this is a question mark. So we need to balance it across the value chain. I think there's a real opportunity going forward because the technologies that are in those vehicles are very advanced and can truly optimize the energy consumed in order to get from one point to the next. So this is a journey that definitely should be embarked on. Today, I would tend to think that it is mostly impactful within the premises of manufacturing sites. But tomorrow, provided as well that the safety is ensured, because we are talking about roads where everybody is on, then I think there's a real opportunity going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. We also have another question I want to share with you with regards to data trust. So when it comes to sharing data, especially in the private sector, among private sector organizations, is there a willingness to share data in order to, provide more transparency, especially thinking, the supply chain is very complex with multiple suppliers, different layers. Where are we right now when it comes to sharing data and the trust as well with regards to that?
Maybe I can jump in regarding the trust and digital sovereignty, what we are standing for in Europe, right? And that is a little bit where I would like to bring all these pieces regarding sovereignty together. So digital sovereignty is all about software sovereignty, data sovereignty, and infrastructure sovereignty. So that means we as a consumer, we as a client, our customers should decide what kind of infrastructure they're using. They should decide if they're using open or closed IP software components, and they should govern the process who owns the data sovereignty aspect of it. And that is what we are working intensively on in the GAIA-X activities, in the International Data Space Association activities, where all these components are coming together so that at the end, the data provider, the client, the customer can control his data and can monitor and visualize who used the data. We call it data usage control and flow. Yeah, that means you can see who get access to what data and how often he used the data. So we are attaching policies framework to data, and then we are under control of the data. So that means this digital sovereignty aspect should gives us at the end, as a consumer and as a client, the trust and the secure way to share data. And that is what we are seeing as more and more coming. The major industry is the automotive industry, with a product called Catena X, where we are heavily engaged in this activity, 250 million funding investment of the German government in this area. We see this in France as well. We see this in the Netherlands. Huge initiatives from the European Commission is coming up there. And it's on the way, I would say. And the technologies and the principles and the reference architectures, as I said, are available and it's underway. Yeah, and this gives us then the digital sovereignty, what we are looking for in Europe.
Fantastic, thank you.
Anyone else has a question among the panelists? I think we're nearly there. So it's 7 p.m. So I think we already have a great, nice conversation. I want to thank you so much, all of you, the attendees, for the participation. Thanks you, Ravindrada, Patricia, Gonka, Chelsea. Thank also to the speakers for joining us today, share about your work and journey with supply chain sustainability powered by AI. We saw that there is still a lot to do with regulation and basically access to data. But I hope still that we have now a better overview of the opportunities in the field. Karen, you want to add something maybe?
Well, thank you so much for giving us an insight in your day-to-day work, and I appreciate the fact that we had different types of organizations here, large ones such as Nestle, Deutsche Telekom, but also startups. And then, of course, I think what's very often overlooked and what we heard in the beginning is also the human aspect of sustainability, because sustainability is not just only environment, it also includes the workers along the way. So thank you so much for giving us an insight into your work.
Thank you for having us. Fantastic panel.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Guys.
Appreciate it.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
evening.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.